there, it's Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me. We're going to be here on CBS Sports Network for the next hour discussing some of the biggest topics in the sport. And I do want to start with a couple of results from Monday night because we had two of the top three teams in the country in action and both won impressively. Final score number 2, Duke 93, Wake Forest 60. Final score number 3, Houston 65, Kansas 59. Norlander, let's start with Duke. Cooper Flagg, again, awesome. 28 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 blocks, 2 steals. Incredible performance for the 5-star freshman. What was your main takeaway from what we saw from the Blue Devils' latest blowout victory?
Main takeaway, let's go big picture here, Parrish. What Duke is doing, there's a bunch going on here. Duke has, on many levels, separated from the worst the ACC has ever been. And yet, as you well know, it just so happens that because the ACC is so terrible, Louisville and Clemson have maintained a 1-game gap in the loss column behind Duke for a number of weeks now, and so Duke has not run away. Like Houston has a 4-game pad on the Big 12 right now. That is 3 more than Duke has in the ACC, and the Big 12 is obviously better than the ACC right now. But at the same time, Duke is still significantly better than Clemson and Louisville, even though Duke got picked off at Clemson's place. I get all that. But we have a Duke team that is extremely, extremely good. You can call it great. This team has now won 10 ACC games by 25-plus points. That's never happened before in school history. And yes, the ACC being down is a factor in that. It's also won 6 straight games by 15-plus points. That had never happened in program history. And it has won 4 straight games by 33-plus points. Not only is that a school record, dating back to at least 1996-97, there has not been a single team that has defeated 4 high major opponents consecutively by 33-plus points. Duke has done it, so we can dig into the flag stuff. I want to talk Wake, but my big picture takeaway off the game Monday was it was another Duke runaway, and I'm not going to take for granted just how absurdly dominant this team is, and I'm eager to see what happens once it gets into the tournament, and does this team face any resistance, any whatsoever, before the Elite Eight?
As I wrote in Tuesday morning's lead to the top 25-1, where Duke remains number 2 behind Auburn, just in front of Houston, is that Duke would be elite in any version of any conference in the history of college basketball. You could take Duke right now, throw them in the SEC, they'd be fine. They might not have the same record, but they'd be fine. You could take Duke and throw it in the Big East that set the record for most teams in the NCAA tournament ever. They'd be fine in that league. They're great. We've known since the preseason that this was the most talented roster in college basketball. All you had to do was look at any NBA mock draft. The question was always, do they have enough experience to balance out the teenagers? Because there had been some recent history to suggest it's harder than ever, perhaps, to win in the sport of men's college basketball with a bunch of teenagers. If you were skeptical of Duke at all in the preseason, that's what it was tied to, not tied to the talent. The talent was always undeniable, and now the undeniable talent has formed one of the best teams in college basketball. And perhaps because there is some data to support it, maybe the best team in college basketball. All that said, the fact that they are just winning all of these games by 25-plus points is an indictment of the ACC. Like, they should be elite, but not doing this to a league.
Oh, they also, GP, they beat Illinois by 43. That's the one thing that I know you know, but in the midst of this, they did play on a quasi-neutral court at the Garden, an Illinois team that just was able to handle Michigan and gave Illinois the worst loss in the history of its program. So the ACC, it is an indictment. I just want to at least inject that for our viewers and listeners too, because in the midst of all this, they just so happened to get, for the first time in a long time, a non-con game in the middle of February against a projected single-digit tournament seed, and they treated them like a bottom-rung ACC team in that matchup too.
Point accepted. I just think if the ACC were anything close to what the ACC should be, we would not be sitting here talking today and saying that Duke is the first college basketball team on the men's side at the Division I level to win at least 10 conference games by 25 points since UNLV did it in the Big West in 1991-92. If the ACC was what it should be, I could not factually say that this morning, but that is a factual statement this morning. And I don't think it's because Duke is the greatest team in college basketball since 1991-92 UNLV. I think that Duke is great, undeniably great, but also playing in a league that is way closer to the Big West than it ever should be. My point being this, the ACC right now rates as the 5th best conference in college basketball. And the truth is, in terms of the numbers, it is closer to being Conference USA or the Atlantic 10 than it is to being the SEC or the Big 10. I'm not saying it's comparable to Conference USA or the Atlantic 10. I'm being very specific with my wording. According to a lot of computer stuff, this league is closer to being Conference USA or the Atlantic 10 than it is the SEC or the Big 10. There are 18 teams in the ACC. Half of them, 9 of them, rank outside of the top 100 in the net. And that's why these upcoming hires at places like Virginia, Miami, Florida State are crucial to the future of the league, because congrats to Duke for being great, but they should not be running through this league the way they're running through this league. And the fact that they are is an indictment of what too many of these other proud programs have become.
Yeah, no doubt. And on the carousel stuff, we'll get to that later on in the show. And I'd mentioned this in the past couple of weeks. I'm not going to take Duke for granted, because I really appreciate this level of dominance. I really appreciate what Auburn has been able to do. Intrigued to see if they can get it done on the road tonight in league play as well. But also, as someone who loves college basketball, wants to see great games every night, an objective viewer of it, I just wish I was catching Duke finding a tough game just 3 times in this league. It's just not happening. It's not Duke's fault. Duke should be going out and playing as good as it possibly could, and it's getting it done. Great on them. It detracts a little bit from the fact that we can't see. We saw the game against Clemson. It was incredible to watch, because we actually saw Duke for the first time in a long time find itself in a game where it was in doubt. It's only been beat 3 times this season. It lost late against Kentucky in the Champions Classic. It lost late against Kansas the week of Thanksgiving, and it got taken out by Clemson. That was senior night. It was also freshman night. And my last thing on Duke, and we can move on and talk Cougars and Jayhawks, GP, if you want. As kind of the game was going on and they were just running away from Wake. I mean, I wondered if Wake could keep it within 20. Lo and behold, it couldn't. But on that floor, Tyrese Proctor returned from his bone bruise. It could be his last game at Cameron. It will be Cooper Flagg's last game at Cameron. It will be Con Knippel's last game at Cameron. It will be Kaman Malawach's last game at Cameron. It will be Sion James's last game. Mason Gillis. Now, these are guys that came in as transfers, but regardless, just the amount of players that will not ever play again in that building that were on display last night, it made it even more impressive in the moment to me to see what they were doing to Wake Forest, and seeing, like, think about how many pieces came together this season that had not played before this. And John Shire is doing an incredible job, has now won more games in his first 3 seasons as a head coach than any coach in ACC history. And with the way that Duke is going, the record is 89 by the likes of Brad Underwood and Brad Stevens. I think Shire would have to make the title game or about that to and not lose in order to get close to matching that record. But he's going to be near the top of the list. He's done an awesome job, and putting all those pieces together and make it work at this level has been pretty incredible to watch.
So after Duke blew out Wake Forest, we got Houston at Kansas. It was more competitive, but the team that was supposed to win also won. The final score, again, Houston 65, Kansas 59. So none of this will be surprising to anybody who is a regular listener of the Eye on College Basketball podcast. It will not surprise any regular listeners that you and I both hold Kelvin Sampson in incredibly high regard. But the numbers, as I've said before, let's not get bored by them. Let's not be less than amazed by them. Houston is now 26-4 on the season, 18-1 in the Big 12. They have a 4-game lead in the Big 12 standings. They have already secured the outright Big 12 championship for the 2nd straight year. So Kelvin Sampson is now 2-0 since moving Houston into the Big 12 as it pertains to trying to win outright conference championships. And since joining the Big 12, this program that came from the AAC and that was dead before Kelvin took it over is now 35-5 against Big 12 opponents. If you include last season's Big 12 schedule, last season's Big 12 tournament, and this season's Big 12 schedule, 35-5 against a league that has more often than not over the past decade been regarded as the sport's best. I can't overstate what this guy's doing with that program. And it was just neat to see him have another big moment last night. Got the post-game interview with Scott Van Pelt on Sports Center. Like, he's one of the very best to ever do it, one of the very best still doing it. And this Houston team, they look exactly like every other awesome Houston team he's had in recent years, and maybe better.
Yeah. Also, I just love the juxtaposition before the game, Parrish. You know, senior night, and you've got one of the toughest teams, one of the toughest coaches, toughest programs in the sport. Houston, just the way they play. I mean, it's just a cage match. And they're that meme from the Saw movies. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me. That is Houston basketball, and yet, you know, Juwan Roberts, who's been there for 6 seasons. You know, the big guy, Kelvin Sampson, just, you know, just two gruff, tough guys reduced to an awesome emotional moment, a big old hug before the game. It's always interesting. I said this on CBS Sports HQ on my overnight hit on Monday night. Coaches and programs handle senior nights in different ways. Some believe lock in, play the game. We'll do everything after a nice little ceremony when the game is done. You can do that, but you chance doing it and having taken a loss. Not often, but it can happen. And then it's just kind of like, you know, it's kind of stinks to do this after a loss, like the Coach K thing. When his last game at Cameron, I was there, super awkward. You do it before the game, you haven't played the game yet. You don't know how it's going to go, but then all these emotions stir up, and they can sometimes work for you, work against you. Houston wound up getting the win. Credit to Kansas, by the way. They actually played a relatively good game. You just happened to be on the road against one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the country, and it wasn't enough overall. 65-59, Houston gets the win. KJ Adams had himself a nice game. Hunter Dickinson, again, he's a stat monster, but it's just not enough. Even David Coyd off the bench had himself a game. They can't put together a full game. Now, the competition needs to be taken into account, because I think if Kansas had played all of except maybe 5 or 6 teams in the country last night the way they did, I actually think Kansas would have won. Just a badly timed opponent. You needed more out of DeJuan Harris. Zeke Mayo, we talked about, you know, the unnecessary vile harassment that he had recently faced. He didn't have his best of games as well. And Rylan Griffin started GP, didn't even score a point in this one. So I thought Kansas played better, but it still wasn't enough. And another memorable night for Houston, which is a team that is sitting on the one line. I won't say comfortably sitting on the one line, because I think we've got some teams to discuss as to who could be a 1 seed. But nevertheless, indisputably right now for me, Houston is a 1.
As for the senior night festivities, I have experienced that, every version of it that you could experience. Pre-game and then you win, pre-game and then you lose, post-game after a win, post-game after a loss. I will say that the absolute best combination is post-game ceremony after a win. That feels the best, and it limits possible distractions pre-game. But I will tell you, the worst combination is post-game after a loss. And that's why, if I were a college basketball coach, and I swear, as stupid as this might sound, I have thought about this before. If I were a college basketball coach, we would do our festivities before tip-off and live with the results, because I don't want to deal with the worst case scenario, which is we're all pissed off after a loss and trying to act like we care about each other and cry tears of joy when they're actually just tears of frustration. So I like the way Houston did it last night. I love Kelvin showing that type of emotion, and then they go out and win the game. Post-game interview with SVP, I thought it was interesting. He sort of highlighted how, you know, we emphasize very specific things, among them offensive rebounding. And among the reasons that we were able to win this game tonight isn't because we're the best offensive team in America every single possession, but because we emphasize offensive rebound, and we went out and took way more shots than them tonight because of turnovers and offensive rebounds. That's a staple of the Houston basketball program, and it was neat to see Kelvin have that discussion with Scott Van Pelt late last night. When we come back, we'll talk number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament. I think Auburn, most of us agree, already has one locked up. Does Duke also? Does Houston also? We'll dive into that next. It's the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Let's talk number one seeds for the 2025 NCAA tournament. Norlander, I think we both agree. In fact, I know we both agree. Auburn already has one of the number one seeds locked up. The Tigers could lose tomorrow night, could lose this weekend, could lose their first game in the SEC tournament, and they would still have a resume that is clearly one of the top four in the country, which equates to a number one seed. Honestly, at this point, they could probably lose every game between now and Selection Sunday and still be the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament. Let's not waste another word on them. Does anybody else have a number one seed locked up at this point? Duke, Houston, Tennessee, anybody?
I actually don't think anyone has it locked up. Now, we just talked about Duke. Here's the reason. Now, again, I do this every year for a pod listener. So if you're a longtime listener, you're familiar. But if you're just catching up, I am a stickler when it comes to using the word lock. Lock means no matter how unlikely the scenario, you can afford to either win out or lose out regardless, and your situation will not change. If Duke were to lose at Carolina, and then unlikely as it would be to lose its first ACC tournament game, and you had some sort of combination of a non-Auburn team winning the SEC tournament, even like any combination of Florida, Alabama, Tennessee getting all the way to the SEC championship game, and those schools not losing since, Houston winning out in the Big 12. It is narrow. I want to be clear. I don't think it's going to happen, but there is a non-0% chance that Duke could fall off the one line if it lost two in a row. Keep in mind, the reason why I say this is Duke right now, because of the down ACC, has 6 quad one wins. The other teams that are in this conversation, Michigan State, we'll get to them in a second, has 10 quad one wins. Tennessee has 10. Bama has 10. I think those are the Florida is sitting with, I'm looking at Florida's overall. Florida's actually at 6-4 in quad one, 15-4 in quad 1 and 2. The Florida versus Duke discussion is actually pretty interesting overall. So I think Auburn is the only team that is truly locked on the one line. But GP, let me send it back to you. How many teams do you think are actually still in play for a one seed? I'll name them, and you let me know if any of these you would take out right now. Auburn, we know. Duke, we know. You've got Houston on the one line right now. Tennessee, the fourth number one. Okay, and then after that, it just jumped Bama. You've got Florida in there. So those, I think, are objectively 6. I don't think you disagree with any of those teams being in the conversation. And then I wonder
don't think
where
anybody could disagree with any of those 6. Those 6 are all still very much in play.
Okay, where do you land on these two teams? Michigan State, which I just mentioned. Michigan State is 10-3 in quad 1. Its resume metrics right now average out to 6.7. It's a projected 2 seed. It still has a couple more big games to go and the Big 10. I think Sparty still has a chance. Now, you got to win these games. Let's be clear. You have to win the games. I can still see a way in which Michigan State works its way in the second best conference in the country. And then St. John's is the interesting one. Johnny's have a road game against Marquette. Now, the problem is the quad 1 stuff. They're 3-4 in quad 1, which seems disqualifying. However, I just wonder. I'm not thinking it'll get there. Let's say St. John's runs the table. Let's say it gets to 30-4 with maybe the number 1 defense in the country. At that point, its quad 1 record might be 7-4 overall. It wouldn't have the high-end wins, but it would have 4 losses by a combined 7 points in a major conference, all against NCAA tournament teams, with the exception of a 2-point loss against Villanova. I don't think St. John's can get to the one line, but I tell you what, it might. I'd have to look this up, GP. It probably would be, in that scenario, the first power conference team to ever hit 30 wins, sweep its league tournament and its regular season, and not get a 1 seed. So are you thinking Johnnies are not worthy of being in the discussion, or should we at least keep a 1% chance that maybe they could break through?
I think they definitely should be in a part of the discussion. I don't know that they will be because of some resume stuff you just touched on, but I like it when we reach the same conclusions independently. You and I have not talked about this at all, and we are completely on the same page. It's those 6. I agree with you. Auburn is the only lock right now. I believe Duke and Houston are also going to be number 1 seeds. Like if you said bet on it, I'm betting that. But I don't think they're locks. Like if Duke were to lose its next 2, it's a quadrant 1 loss at North Carolina, and then maybe something less than a quadrant 1 loss in the ACC tournament. If we got Auburn already as a lock, and Houston we think gets there, and there's only 2 spots left, what happens if Florida and Tennessee win out in the regular season, then win all the way through to the SEC tournament title game? One of them wins it. That's a 1 seed. The other one probably has a better resume than Duke at that point. That's another 1 seed. Duke could still slip. But I would bet on Auburn, Duke, Houston, and somebody else. If I'm betting right now, it's Auburn, Duke, Houston, and another SEC school, Florida or Tennessee or Alabama. But absolutely, you've got to look at Michigan State, particularly if the Spartans are outright Big Ten champs and Big Ten tournament champs. And yes, St. John's. I know that it will not have the resume to support it, but at one point, if you're on the committee, do you just say, they just won the Big East outright. They just won the Big East tournament. They've looked like one of the best teams in America for a while. They clearly have one of the best coaches of all time. It's one of the greatest defensive teams in the sport. At what point do you just have to say, I can't support it with the resume, but do we really think there's 4 teams better than what that team's been over the past couple of months? I think it's got to be a conversation.
GP, I really thought that you might not be able to get there with St. John's. And to be clear, they've got to do it. St. John's will need to win out. If it does, I'm not saying I will be closed-minded to this. I'm just telling you, if I have a 30-4 team that has one of the best coaches of all time, that could have the best defense in the country, okay? The best defense in the country. It might be them because they're number 2 right now. And they have 4 losses by a combined 7 points. If anything, this is an argument against the quadrant system because right now, St. John's, resume metric-wise, strength of record, and wins above bubble, it's sitting at 8. That will creep up to the 4 or 5 spot if St. John's wins out. I'm not going to predict it's going to happen. I just think that we should still keep open the possibility. And MSU, GP, this is going to be a ton of fun because I can't remember many seasons like this where the number 1 seems locked. And then under that, you've got plenty of fluctuation with teams that have very compelling resumes. Now, we bring all this up with the acknowledgement that some of these teams are probably going to take a loss or 2 here, and these things tend to settle each other out. Now, we do have debates. Remember last year, Iowa State versus North Carolina, there was a split on whether they should be the final number 1. We're probably going to get to that anyway. And maybe ultimately with matchups, who's on the 1 line, who's on the 2 line, maybe there's not too much differentiation. But in prepping for the show, I took a scan and I find this to be super compelling. Love this time of year for a lot of reasons, and one of them is just I'm more interested personally because the teams are better in who gets the 1 line versus who lands on the 2 versus the teams that are the last ones into the field. These are the better teams. These are national championship contenders, and they have very differing resumes. And the strength of the SEC is what makes the debate so compelling because a lot of these teams, understandably so, are just piling up high quality wins. Meantime, St. John's is running it's running the same race on a different track altogether. I wonder if they can get there. Don't count out Michigan State. I will blindly predict this, GP. If Michigan State wins the regular season in the Big Ten and wins the Big Ten tournament, that's the second best conference in the country. If it does that, it's going to be a 1 seed. Some way, somehow, the math will shake out. I cannot imagine the committee not putting the double champ of the second best league in the country not on the 1 line. I think Sparty will get there, but again, it's got to do it in order to do it.
It's going to be a fun next week and a half. We're going to play a bunch of games and we'll get it all figured out in advance of Selection Sunday, or perhaps not even have it figured out in advance of Selection Sunday. We might spend part of Selection Sunday still trying to figure out, but it's going to be a fun week and a half. When we come back, I want to turn our attention to some coaching news. Virginia Tech is reportedly going to bring back Mike Young for another season rather than spend millions of dollars to buy him out. They're going to spend millions of dollars in NIL and see if that can do the trick. Is this the way of the future? I'll ask Norlander next. It's the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Notable headline on Monday, Virginia Tech reportedly going to bring back Mike Young for a 7th season, even though he's about to miss the NCAA tournament for the 3rd straight year. The idea behind it would be rather than pay millions of dollars to buy him out, remove him, and then spend millions of dollars to hire a new coach, why not just take that money, invest it in NIL, and try to buy a roster that you can then hand to your coach to maybe get back into the top half of the ACC and start competing for NCAA tournament bids once again. Norlander, do you think this is the way of the future? In other words, used to you decide you don't think your coach is doing a good job. You just paid whatever you had to pay to make him go away and you move on with it. Now, I do think there's a logical theory here that suggests before we give up on a guy who has been a good coach before, why don't we take the money we'd have to pay him to, go fishing? Why don't we take that money, let him buy some players with it, and see if we can bounce back the relevancy in that way. Do you think this is going to be more normal than maybe people realize?
I think there's a chance this will not be the way across the board, because the counter argument is, all right, we've had this coach here for X number of years, and if we get rid of him, we will bring in a new hire, and in doing so, we will rally even more money from our base and our most important
Yes.
donors to give us more money to bring in new players. This will be a circumstance by circumstance situation. Frankly, it depends on the level of job, the amount of prestige, the amount of pressure, the amount of fan support. Similar situation, I was told by sources at Boston College, in addition to a few other places where a change is not expected. So just keep that in mind. I don't think it's necessarily a bad approach, especially if you're at a job of the level of Virginia Tech, which is not a top half of the ACC job. And that's now an 18 school conference. And frankly, in not just my opinion, but in talking to coaches and agents and search firm people over the years, like, Virginia Tech probably doesn't register in the top 12 to 14 jobs right now in the ACC as it's currently constructed. And Mike Young's a really, really good coach. He's having some down years. If you can invest in NIL, Virginia Tech was among the worst in that conference, unquestionably, heading into this season. Then maybe you've got a shot. But this will not be the dominant trend. You will still see coaches get fired on an accelerated timeline in the age of revenue sharing, which should come later this year, and NIL opportunities, because we saw what happened last year. We'll see it again in a couple other places in this year's cycle. Actually, as we speak right now, coincidentally enough, my college coaching carousel tracker published at cbssports.com or on the CBS Sports App. Feel free to give that a go. There are 11 impending vacancies, and that number will, at minimum, quadruple over the next 3 to 4 weeks. So I know I'm going a little long here, GP. I'll send it back to you. I don't oppose the method. I do think you will see it deployed in some places, but in other spots, there's enough people that care enough, that have enough money. That coach will not be given the extra year. They will look to move on, and in doing so, try and inject even more NIL money than would have otherwise been the case if they kept the coach.
I think you got it right. It's a case-by-case basis, because I understand what Virginia Tech's doing here. In fact, if I were at Virginia Tech, this is what I would be hoping we're trying to do there. Mike Young's a good basketball coach, really good basketball coach. You know what people said about him? You just talk to other basketball coaches, men who worked in his league, even before he got to Virginia Tech. You just said, hey, what do you think of Mike Young? You know what they say? Man, that guy can really coach. Man, that guy's a really good basketball coach. Then he got to Virginia Tech, and he did some really good stuff early on. And it's obviously fallen off. But as I watch this Virginia Tech team struggle below 500 this season, I'm not surprised by it, because this is about what they were supposed to be in the preseason. The roster wasn't good. Now, what is the main reason a roster is not good in the year 2025? It is probably because you didn't have NIL to either keep the players you wanted to keep or get some players you wanted to get. And so rather than, and the reported buyout is $4 million, rather than spend $4 million to make a guy not too long ago everybody thought was a good college basketball coach go away, so that then you can come up with more millions to hire his replacement. And then, oh, by the way, you still got to spend more millions on NIL, or else you're just going to end up firing the replacement the same way you fired Mike Young. Rather than do all that, why not? And it doesn't have to be exactly this, but instead of giving him $4 million to go away, give him $4 million and say, spend it on basketball players. And that might not get you to match player for player with Duke or North Carolina, but that'll get you to a better place than you've been. And if that doesn't work, then maybe we've got to make some different decisions. But that would be my first step. The other side of that, of course, is what you lay out, which is that this money doesn't come from nowhere. It typically comes from wealthy people who care deeply about stuff. And sometimes those people just want a new coach. They just want something new to believe in. And it can be difficult to convince them sometimes to keep throwing money at something they no longer believe in. Whereas it's very easy to get people to throw money at something that's brand new and shiny. Like, I think John Calipari has more NIL money at Arkansas than Eric Musselman did, because he was the new thing and the exciting
I think
thing.
I know. We know, and it's by a factor of a lot.
Pat Kelsey at Louisville, I'm certain, has more NIL money than Kenny Payne had, because he was the new thing and you want to believe in it and you throw money at it. It's much easier to get people to get excited about something new than it is to get excited about something heading into year 7 that's coming off of back-to-back not so great years. So it can cut both ways, but I like what Virginia Tech did here. I think it makes sense to me, at least.
Yeah, it does to me as well. And I think Young getting one more year does make sense. In the bigger picture, we talked about how bad the ACC is. And there's a lot of coaches that are going to return from not great seasons. And it feels inevitable that a year from now, March 4th, 2026, we'll be talking about at least one or two of these coaches that were, outside the top 100 of Ken Palm having another bad year and then them deciding to move on. That's fine. Sometimes the one coach might need the extra year and look at what's happened. I mean, Syracuse, I checked in on that situation, and it has not gone well for Red Autry. Carmelo Anthony's son is going to join the roster next season, and that staff is expecting to return. And it's jarring to see how far off the map Syracuse has fallen, but give them one more year. Okay, see if it can happen. Maybe it does. Maybe the next Anthony can not duplicate what Carmelo did. I'm not even come close to insinuating that, but maybe they can get back on the right track. Some of the times this will work out, sometimes it won't. But here's where we are. First week of March, carousel season. It's already spinning. It's an unfortunate but inevitable reality to the sport. The games matter, March Madness. But as all this happens, as you will know, in the backdrop, and sometimes not even in the backdrop of this, a lot of stuff that will shape the storylines and things in the sport for years to come. It begins to bubble up now and will materialize over the next 3-4 weeks.
So let's continue the coaching carousel conversation when we get back from this next break, because somebody asked me this question this weekend. I want to ask you. Indiana job's already open. Texas job looks like it could open. You put both those jobs on the table, similar financial packages. What job would a typical coach prefer? The Indiana job, the blue blood job, or the Texas job? We'll try to answer that next. It's the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast, CBS Sports Network. It's never too early to talk coaching carousel. I mean, it might be, but it's certainly not too early in March, and we are in March. Somebody asked me over the weekend, Norlander, Indiana job is open, Texas job could open. If you put that job on a table for most college basketball coaches, while recognizing different things matter to different people, but if you put those jobs on a table, how would most people in the industry rate those jobs, the Texas job against the Indiana job?
We did this last week. Was it last week when I asked Indiana versus Virginia, and I think I asked 12 coaches, and then in real time when we did the show, not all of them got back to me. By the end of that, I did hear from all of them. It was 9-3 Indiana over Virginia was the split. All things being equal, which one would you rather take? And 9-3 Indiana won. Indiana Texas is more compelling. Texas, in my estimation, and this is based on, I don't know, years and years and years of conversations about this stuff, I would say Texas is a top 10 job in college basketball. It is a job that carries a lot with it, a lot of benefits. But, Texas also notoriously does happen to have a lot of people a lot of cooks can get in that kitchen. Not that, and that's not even necessarily the case at Indiana, but Texas, it can get even bigger. I think if you and I went out and sought out 50 coaches, 15 coaching agents, 5 to 7 people in charge of search firms, and throw in another half dozen folks in college athletics and said, which one, either or. I think my projection on that, you'd get a 60-40 return in favor of Texas. Within the coaching community, I think the number would be even greater. I think you might get close to a 70-30 return in favor of Texas. Now, to be clear, as GP said, Texas has not opened, but in talking to sources, my expectation is if that Rodney Terry does not have a serious surge in the month of March, that job is expected to come available. So I think Texas is the better job. Indiana's good. Don't get me wrong. It's a really, really good job. But to me, with everything Texas affords, also has a relatively new building in addition to plenty of other stuff, location to talent, all of it. I'd go Texas. What about you?
I would rather be the Texas coach than the Indiana coach. And I think that's what most people within the industry would say, what most college basketball coaches would say. Like that Indiana job, I imagine it must feel like you're king of the world when you are king of the world. But when you're not, it gets really ugly. And it typically gets really ugly for everybody. I mean, Mike Woodson there was a moment in this season where Mike Woodson, by definition, had a team that was still capable of making the NCAA tournament, and they were chanting to fire him during the games. And it led to him, on some level, reaching the conclusion that he doesn't want to do this job anymore after the season. And that happened not in the middle of a season where they were going to finish last in the Big Ten. That happened in the middle of a season where they still, by definition, had a chance to be in the NCAA tournament, because as of this moment, they still have a chance to be in the NCAA tournament. So that's a big job with a lot of history, but it can get really difficult in a way that is frankly just unattractive for some people. And though, listen, Rick Barnes did get pushed out of Texas after a billion years,
Yes.
even even after, broadly speaking, doing a consistently great job there,
Yes.
great job there. But I think the patience with which a fan base can deal with you is much greater at Texas than it is at Indiana, not even debatable. And yeah, I think that's why most people would rank the Texas job ahead of the Indiana job if we were putting together such list.
I think that these are sibling positions because Woodson's probably, I mean, knock on wood, it could go, and pun unintended, it could go sideways again, and Indiana could not make the tournament. This is probably going to be true. Mike Woodson is not going to last more than 4 years at Indiana as an alum and having made the tournament 3 out of his 4 years. There's a lot more nuance and detail that goes into why that is the end result, but that is a damning overall factual statement. For Texas, Rick Barnes made the tournament literally every year except one, and that was his anti-penultimate season in Austin. But other than that, he got nudged out after a long time. Shaka Smart, the year that he decided to go to Marquette and, as it goes in coaching parlance, beat the posse out of town. Granted, it was an upset. Texas was a 3 seed, so it was on the wrong side of an intrastate upset, Abilene Christian. But Shaka Smart made the tournament 3 times. There was some underwhelmingness, but same kind of deal there. The expectations at Texas are pretty big. And so it's interesting that someone brought that question up to you, because it is one to think on. And both programs have evidence this century of pushing out coaches who were good, accomplished, have gone on to other places and done even bigger and greater things. And if you could really sit down Rick Barnes and sit down Shaka Smart and sit down Tom Crean and go on down the list and just give them some truth serum and tell you what it was really like, what it is like to wear that hat, to hold those jobs at those places, all the good things, but all the not so good things as well. I find them both to be very interesting. I would give Texas the narrow margin, but it's not like Texas. I think some people think, it's like the Ohio State job. Well, even that, look what happened to Chris Holtmann. These jobs that have a lot of very rich people and fan bases that even if they care more about football than they do basketball, it can still go sideways on you. It can go sideways in a hurry and become an uncomfortable existence. And so that's why when you pick the next coach at each of these programs, you really need to be very particular about who you're hiring, what you're willing to endure, and how that person works within the confines of your athletic department and the overall community that supports the team.
When we come back, we'll take a brief look at tonight's schedule. We got a triple header on CBS Sports Network. We'll get you ready for that. This is the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back, Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. One more segment to go. Let's look ahead to Tuesday night's schedule. We got a triple header on CBS Sports Network. I can't wait to get in studio. I'll be there all night with Brent Stover, Ice Young, and former NBA All-Star Roy Hibbert. Inside College Basketball at 6:30 Eastern. Then we got triple header. VCU at Duquesne, New Mexico at Nevada, San Diego State at UNLV. There's 3 likely NCAA tournament teams in VCU, New Mexico, and San Diego State. At the end of the night, we'll wrap everything up with another 30-minute episode inside college basketball. Elsewhere in the sport, Texas at Mississippi State, Auburn at Texas A&M, Arkansas at Vanderbilt, BYU at Iowa State. Norlander, what are you looking forward to tonight?
What I'm looking forward to most is Mr. Stover's hair situation it's elevating literally, and he is on a heater right now. So we can talk matchups, but
I don't mean to
join
interrupt.
me?
I don't mean to interrupt. I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yes.
have you seen the hair commercials starring Brent Stover?
So I was just about to go there. This guy is he's on one. Fast rising star. He can't be stopped. Stover, leave some for the rest of us. How dare you look that good and force GP to sit right next to you on the desk? I mean, come on, man.
It's
Stepping
tough.
it up
It's tough.
aggressively.
It's tough. It's tough.
You gotta say something to the guy, GP. He's a one seat of hair at the moment. Couldn't help but bring it up.
Everything I say is laced in insecurities. Do you know what first off, you don't know what it's like to be short and bald, but let me just tell you, it's not fun.
I'm tall and I have hair, so I don't know.
People say some wild stuff about you when you walk around this world short and bald all the time, all right? And then you got to go on TV and sit next to a guy who is so great looking and has such great hair that he's literally in hair commercials. All right? That's what I'm dealing with. That's what I know. Everybody's got their own challenges in life, but this is mine. Currently, this is mine.
I'm looking forward to watching you guys in studio tonight. I don't know if you mentioned Indiana at Oregon. That's also a game to watch, just because if Indiana were to win the game, I don't know if I can go lock, but oh boy, you talk about a highly valuable road opportunity for the Hoosiers there. A&M has been bad as of late. Can it muster an upset situation after losing 4 in a row against Auburn? Does it catch Auburn being lackadaisical? I don't know. BYU, Iowa State. BYU has 5 road wins. A team that is really A&M and BYU, they're going in opposite directions. Not even in the same league, but curious to see what A&M does at home against a good team and what BYU can do on the road. Arkansas needs to not completely vomit on its shoes again after what it did against South Carolina. And then Georgia plays at South Carolina on Tuesday night. Can Mike White's team, I think Georgia probably needs, I was looking at it earlier, I think if you told me Georgia got 2 wins some way, somehow, however they can get them, I think that would be enough to make sure that the Bulldogs get into the field. But it's an intriguing night across the board for projected 1 seeds, bubble teams. There's a little bit of everything for everyone on this Tuesday night. So yeah, I'm keeping an eye on all of it. And oh, by the way, Arizona State plays at Arizona. There's not a lot there other than the fact that Bobby Hurley straight up did not allow anyone on his team to shake a single person's hand that was affiliated with Arizona the last time these teams played. That's a late tip. I'm just kind of curious to see how this goes. On Tuesday night down in Tucson.
Would you be concerned at all if you're an Auburn fan? You've locked up the SEC outright title. According to all the idiots that talk on podcasts, you've locked up the #1 overall seed. You're on the road against a team that was ranked in the top 10 that's on a 4-game losing streak and desperate to break out of it. Is this a little bit of a trap thing for the Tigers?
If I'm an Auburn fan, I don't think so. Maybe if a loss does come, which I don't think will happen, even if it does, maybe you think like, okay, that's the final loss, get it out of our system, and now like refocus, recalibrate for the postseason, and we're good to go. I would not, even if a loss came, if I was an Auburn fan, no matter how it came, I don't think I would be too disturbed by that.
All right, let's get out of here. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Terry Teagle, he's a legend. Huck Larnell, thank you guys once again for watching the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. There's more of us than there are of them. That should be reflected in all of the comments. So please go do that. And we will talk to you again on CBS Sports Network next week. Next live episode comes on Wednesday morning. And in the meantime, I'll see you later on tonight on CBS Sports Network, Inside College Basketball, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Till then, take care.